You knew it was going to happen at some point. You knew there'd be a big injury, and we are here ready to talk about it on an emergency podcast. This is Injury Territory. I'm Will Carroll. Edwin Diaz will join us again in just a second, but the news has broken, and unfortunately, the Dodgers closer has gone with it. Let's start with what we know. We've got one here that looks simple on the surface. Edwin Diaz, bone chips in his elbow, and they're saying he's roughly out for 3 months. But if you watch this show long enough, it hasn't been that long, you know when something sounds simple and the timeline isn't, it's not simple. So let's start with what we know. Edwin Diaz has loose bodies, bone chips in his elbow. That's usually a scope. You clean it out, you calm it down, and historically you're talking about weeks rather than months. This used to be one of the easiest injury buckets to understand, but not anymore because of the way we treat it. He would always jokingly say this was like the game operation. You reach in, you pull it out, you hope the guy's nose doesn't light up. What we've learned is that bone chips aren't really the injury, they're the evidence. Loose bodies in the elbow come from somewhere. It's cartilage wear, small fractures, more often bone spurs breaking down. And those bone spurs, well, that's where this gets interesting. There's been a long-standing belief, especially around guys like Dr. James Andrews, that bone spurs can act as kind of a functional brace. Not healthy, not ideal, but it's the body trying to stabilize a joint that's taking on too much stress. So when you remove them, you're not just cleaning things up. You might be removing part of what was helping the elbow hold together. And that's the quiet risk. You restore the range of motion, and now the ligament has to do more work. And if this were just debris, well, Diaz would be back in 6 weeks. That's the old model. Scope, flush, go. 3 months tells you that the Dodgers are treating this as something different entirely. They're asking, why did this elbow start making debris? We've already seen a clue. He had that velocity dip. Early in the season, it's usually not random. It's often the first external signal that something internal isn't right, whether that's inflammation, mechanical, he had that knee, or early instability. So now the timeline isn't about healing from surgery. It's about rebuilding the elbow's tolerance to stress, and that's a very different clock. And this is where people get tripped up because the comps don't line up cleanly anymore. You can go back and find guys who had loose bodies and removed, and were back quickly. Johan Santana did it in 15 days, I think 16 actually. But that used to be standard, but it's the modern comps. A lot of noise. We're catching these things earlier and in more complicated elbow. Let's talk about two of them. Shohei Ohtani had loose bodies removed in 2020, but that was layered on top of an already compromised ligament. That wasn't just a cleanup, that was a wholesale reconstruction. Kind of the same with Chris Sale. He had not really a clean loose body case, but it came before his Tommy John, which is a reminder that elbow irritation can set on a path that leads somewhere much worse. The lesson isn't that Diaz is headed there. It's that how we understand it has changed. Bone chips used to be the diagnosis. Now it's a symptom within the broader holistic context. So there's 3 big shifts here, and you can feel them all in this case. First, imaging. Teams see everything now. And they see it quickly with digital technology. You're diagnosing the beginning of problems, not just the catastrophic end. Second, velocity. Diaz isn't just the closer. He's a 98 triple-digit guy, and that matters. That level, the elbow isn't operating comfortably inside its limits. It's flirting with disaster on every pitch. And third, asset value. This isn't some fungible bullpen arm. He's a major financial piece to the Dodgers. Not that they lack for those. There's just no incentive to rush him back for June if August, September, and October are the real target. So the conservative timeline isn't caution for its own sake. It's more calculating. The return here isn't the story. The ramp is. When Diaz starts throwing, I want you to watch for 2 things. First, velocity. Does it come back quickly or does it lag? We've seen that with Zach Wheeler. So it's, again, different injury, but same sort of kind of clue. And usage. Do they ease him in as a setup man or do they just hand him the 9th again? Because if the elbow is truly stable, this all just becomes a footnote and they get another ring. They're aiming for October, not May. So remember, bone chips sound small, but they rarely are anymore. Not because the surgery changed, but what we've learned about it. With Diaz, the Dodgers aren't treating the fragments, they're treating what the fragments might mean. And that's the difference between 4 weeks and 3 months. So, Edward, obviously, big injury, big team, big contract, tiny, tiny little fragments. But this is probably the biggest injury this season, I think.
Yeah, and I think one of the big reasons for that, aside from sort of the state of the game, largely, being okay, something we've talked about before, where, the injuries are not fast and furious like maybe they have been in other recent Aprils. But at the same time, when you look at the investment that the Dodgers have been making, I mean, the expectations for them are to win a third consecutive ring. And they feel like most everywhere else, things have been largely fine. I think it's always important whenever we're looking at the Dodgers or any other championship contender, how do they usually get to this point? Usually what happens with the Dodgers is there's a bit of a surprise when it comes to the bullpen and pitchers, and the fact that they've had more than their fair share of arm injuries over these last several seasons, but at least within the last 2 years, they've been able to overcome. The question is, how much longer can that success continue? Yeah. And given the investment that they have here, I mean, look, there are a lot of good options for the Dodgers going forward. Tanner Scott, Alex Vesia, guys like that. That's fantastic. At the same time, though, when you're looking at what tends to happen to them, it may feel more like pre-2024 than the here and the now with having an injury like this one.
Absolutely. Let's talk about that in more detail. After this break, the breaking news, Edwin Diaz out for months. He'll have surgery this week to remove bone chips.
People, life is expensive. So you should start looking at things that are unnecessarily expensive, like your phone bill, and say, is there a better option?
Mint Mobile is a better option than if you have other companies, especially when you have kids like me and you have everybody and their brother on your family plan. Mint Mobile will give you a cheaper option with the same coverage.
Yes, and some wireless bills are crazy with the bogus fees and the free perks. They are not free perks. They cost you more in the long run. So just go to Mint Mobile, check out what they have to offer. All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. If you like your money, Mint Mobile is for you. Shop plans at mintmobile.com/territory. That's mintmobile.com/territory. Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month 5 gigabyte plan required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customer offer for first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See Mint Mobile for details.
Welcome back to an emergency edition of Injury Territory. You've probably seen it. Edwin Diaz out with bone chips, rather. They usually start as bone spurs. If they break loose, they become bone chips. We don't know the location. One of the things, let's talk about what we don't know. We don't know the location. It has to be problematic. We don't know when this started, though certainly that velocity dip is a big clue. We don't know who's going to do the surgery, though the assumption is it's going to be Neil Elitrosh. We know it's going to be later this week. My guess is that means Thursday. Surgeons have certain days they have scheduled for surgery. You don't just run in there. People say, it's Edwin Diaz. It's a big baseball player. It's still an operating room. So even at a place like Kerlan Jobe, those are booked up months and months in advance with other people, not always athletes. So you mentioned something really interesting, Edward, and that is that the Dodgers have had more than their share of injuries. And this is true. They've been among the worst in terms of injury results, and yet 2 rings. This is largely by design. There are a lot of things they do. They take on risk. They knew they didn't take on Clayton Kershaw, but they kept him around knowing how fragile he was. Edwin Diaz, when they signed him, they knew he had issues, but obviously he cleared the physical. They've got a lot of young pitchers that they used in unusual ways, and they've got a lot more young pitchers. So I'm curious, you mentioned Scott and Vesia, who's come back. That's a good story. Blake Treinen's another guy, even though we got thumped in the head the other day. They've got Brewster Graterol, who's had closer stuff and been a closer. He's still coming back. But they've still got more guys. Justin Robleski is shifted over. Blake Snell is on his way back. He hasn't started. But there's going to be kind of, even in a 6-man, more people than they have. Does Bobby Miller come back? What do they do with Ben Kasparius? Is he a long reliever? Is he a starter? What do they do with River Ryan and Jackson Ferris, who are ready? That whole minor league system is basically outfielders and pitchers. It's kind of funny when you look at their list that they've got. Pretty much that's it. I wonder how they figure out who's playing second base or first base. Some of these guys are going to shift. We know that. It's like everybody drafts shortstops and then figures out where it fits. But I'm wondering, do they start looking at high velocity guys, guys like River Ryan that can fill in and, not necessarily have to go with the Tanner Scotts and Vessias? If this isn't a long-term thing, can they experiment? And, Dave Roberts and Mark Pryor and the brain trust over there with the Dodgers certainly have been willing to experiment. The one name I haven't mentioned yet, and this is the one I think they're going to have to think about, Roki Sasaki hasn't been good as a starter, but he was awful good in October. Stunning how well he came out after struggling most of his rookie season, went all the way down. I think they had him at AA. I know he was with Oklahoma City for a while trying to rebuild himself. He comes back as a closer, something he'd never done, and tore it up through October. So do they start thinking, hey, maybe that's where he goes? And if so, having him and Diaz and Scott and Vesia and Treinen and Dreyer and
right.
This isn't a situation where they're lacking for options.
Should we just go ahead and make sure we have a clip of this conversation right now? So if Mookie Betts is out for an extended period of time, then basically we can just rehash this and make sure that, we're pointing the finger at the Dodgers because they've solved one problem, but not the other one.
This isn't wrong.
Right.
Mookie Betts, Freddie Freeman, well, he's out on paternity right now, but he's got a long-term ankle issue, as does Tommy Edman. He hasn't made it back from that long-term ankle issue. Kike Hernandez
starting to add up. Yeah.
But this is the pattern. They've been perfectly willing to take this on, to take big contracts, knowing, hey, we don't care about April. Joe Sheehan pointed this out a while back, that we're not going to see a supremely talented Dodgers team win 110 games. We might not see them win 100 games due to the sheer number of injuries they've had. But when you take a look at where this is actually going, I don't think they care. Winning 115 games, winning 120 games doesn't add anything in the playoffs. You get to the playoffs and it's, short series and shorter rotations, and we've seen the Dodgers win at that. Billy Beane famously said his stuff didn't work in the playoffs. Andrew Friedman's does. And if he has Diaz back, if he has Mookie Betts back, if you keep the players at a certain level, in a short series, they've shown they can be very, very successful. Hey, the Jays pushed them. The Jays almost took it out, and we wouldn't be talking about back-to-back if they had. But again, the last 2 years and even before, they've dealt with the same level of injuries. They've dealt with... The reason they brought in Edwin Diaz was to try and get more certainty about that closer position. They thought it was one of the very few places they could actually get better.
It's a mental health decision.
Yeah, and the fact that, again, I don't think Diaz was that risky bringing him in. I would have to look back at what I wrote about it, but he hasn't had arm problems. He had that one absolutely fluky, celebrating in the World Baseball Classic. I think it was patellar tendon. It was a tendon issue in his knee. That doesn't happen. You keep him from celebrating and getting dogpiled. Hey, he should be healthy. There is a risk of that with the Dodgers. So, they win enough. So I don't think it was particularly risky, but it was the bold kind of spend some money move that they've done over and over again. So the fact that he is going to miss June, I don't think that it bothers them as much as it's going to bother the fans.
I would agree with that. And I want to touch back on this Roki Sasaki thing that you're bringing up, because I think this is important when it comes to overall expectations. Yes, we're talking about the Vessias and Tanner Scotts and guys like that in terms of taking over that closer role. Fine. And they might. But there is an expectation that Sasaki is supposed to pan out. And in terms of regular seasons alone, that really hasn't happened. And at some point, you do have to have some kind of return on your investment and develop him just enough to where, all right, maybe he's not going to be the closer, but he's going to be a darn good bridge guy for you in some way, shape, or form. And to me, especially given just the, where the Dodgers are in the standings right now, I mean, one of the reasons why it's so important to kind of get off to a hot start is so that ultimately you can experiment with things. And I wonder, losing Diaz, does that mean that the experimentation goes out the window? And with other guys as well. Like, it's not just him. Like, the Dodgers do have other guys who are missing right now. And my question then is there mixing and matching that you can afford to do to find out every single little combination that can be effective for you in October? And that does take a while. That's not a September thing. That can be an August, July thing, especially if you have a massive lead in your division. But the Dodgers may not necessarily have that luxury this go round. And so it's sort of the secondary and tertiary effects that, to me, is sort of the story here. But it can also be an opportunity for someone like Sasaki to be able to develop just a little bit more. Those opportunities are there, and then maybe it kind of resolves itself. But if it doesn't, you don't have that experimentation, and you're going to make a lot more questions, or rather, you're going to make more moves where you don't really know the outcome when you get to those October series.
Yeah, I can go both ways with this. I see what you're saying, Edward. I think there's going to be a little forced experimentation. I don't think they'd think about Sasaki going to the bullpen unless he just... I think it might actually be a better situation for him if he doesn't completely fail out of the rotation. Same thing for Wroblewski. If Snell comes back and somebody gets pushed, okay, I'm getting pushed for a Cy Young type of guy who's on a big contract. Nobody's losing face over that. With Sasaki now, and with Treinen or Vesia or all the other possibilities, he can. Dave Roberts and Mark Pryor can mix and match. They can experiment now. But when the assumption is Diaz is going to come back, let's make that very clear. He's going to come back. It's going to be a couple months, and he should be fine. I think by the time we get to October, we'll have forgotten this. His save totals won't be high, but we won't really remember why. So I think this is a long-term meh. I don't think it really matters to the Dodgers unless some of that experimentation, unless some of that fill-in doesn't work. Let's say they move Vesia to the full-time closer role. He's sort of in it. They mix and match more than most teams, even with Diaz. If they start losing one-run games, that's going to matter because the Padres are not only good, they've got new ownership, which is something we're going to talk about, but they've also got A.J. Preller, who is going to do A.J. Preller things come the trade deadline. So if they're close, they're going to tweak. They're going to make trades we didn't expect. They're going to make those three-way deals in July that we didn't see coming. And if the Dodgers aren't a couple games better than them, I'm not talking 10, I'm not talking 20. I'm talking, if the Dodgers are a wild card, that's a big disadvantage.
Absolutely it is. And then that's exactly what we're discussing here, that it's what kind of experimentation can you do because you have the luxury to be able to do it. And losing Diaz does take away some of those options. But again, there are arms that need to be developed. I mean, I remember it was like a couple of years ago, I was looking up how often certain pitchers throw heat second time, third time through the order when it comes to, instead of going after your secondary, your third pitch because the hitters haven't seen it. Instead, you're still throwing heat and perhaps even at full force about as often as possible. And you're always pointing to Dodgers pitchers to be able to do that. There's always been the philosophy that they are more than okay losing arms as long as there are enough really, really good ones come October. And yes, that sort of philosophy has had to be tweaked, but it has been successful over the last couple of years. I will be curious if we continue to see that. It may also be something where preservation matters just a little bit more. You're not necessarily overtaxing certain guys as much perhaps as you could, because you just get a little bit thinner, and then suddenly the priority to win games over experiment sort of trumps everything else.
Absolutely. I mentioned the Padres. The Padres have reportedly been sold. And later this week, I'm going to have a guest, Craig Elston, who's a longtime Padres guy who understands Jose Feliciano, the new owner of the Padres, because he's a soccer guy as well as a baseball guy. So we're going to take a look at that later this week. So again, let me just recap this. The Dodgers have placed Edwin Diaz on the injured list. He will have surgery for those loose bodies in his elbow where he has bone chips. He's going to miss, they're saying, up to 3 months. I think it'll be less than that, but this is not going to be one of those 4-week, 6-week injuries that we've seen in the past. So we'll get more information. We'll cover this more, but we wanted to make sure everybody had the best possible information that we have at this point. So Edward, thanks for jumping on the emergency podcast.
Thank you.
We'll be back next time here on Injury Territory.